Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to EduSmart's webinar series, where we're going to talk about preparing students for a variety of assessments. My name is Lisa DeLaurier, and I am the Director of Content and Professional Development at EduSmart. Happy to be with you this afternoon. So I have an agenda that's going to cover everything we're going to talk about this afternoon. First, of course, preparing students for assessments. I know a lot of our attendees are from Texas, so I'm going to do a quick review of the new Texas assessment item types. And then I'm going to talk about where to find these item types in EduSmart resources and assessments. We have these for both customers in Texas and in Florida. And then a brief review about how to monitor student performance in EduSmart, and then open it up for questions at the end. So I want to start with this quote that's from John Dewey. This was over 100 years ago, that he said, "Give the pupil something to do, not something to learn, and the doing is of such a nature as to demand thinking. Learning naturally results." So this is how we like to teach science now, so that you have kids doing rather than just listening. And we've designed our product around this, making sure that kids are doing active learning. And active learning is what research has shown is the most effective way to prepare kids for assessment. So I've compiled some bullet points from research from a bunch of different university locations. And what the research is saying is that kids need to use problem solving, discussion, hands-on activities, brief writing activities, and interactive activities in order to be ready for assessment. That teachers should limit lecturing to a small portion of the class, preferably in small chunks. Use purposeful pauses, so you give the kids time to think before they respond. That students need an opportunity to reflect, either with self-assessment or peer assessment. And you need to use flexible grouping, that you don't always do whole class, or you don't always have kids work in an individual manner. And so if you are an EduSmart customer, you probably see that we hit every single one of these bullet points. That we have a lot of problem solving activities, opportunities for discussion, hands-on activities, and we have a lot more coming in the next school year, brief writing activities, and of course a lot of short interactivities as well as simulations. Our instructional modules are where we have sort of the lecturing part of our product, and of course we do deliver that in small chunks, and we put those purposeful pauses in there so that the video will stop and the kids have time to think and respond to the question that's usually posed before that pause. The self-assessment, our new science investigation activities all have a self-assessment portion where the kids compare their answers, a short constructed response answer to a correct one, and they have to judge how well it matches. And of course, anything we have with the claim evidence reasoning, there's a part of that process is doing peer assessment. So you find out what other groups are doing. And of course, our entire product is flexible, and you can use any assignments in any type of grouping that you would like. So again, how does it help with active learning? Just to reiterate that we have this in every standard for every grade level that we have a product, both in Texas and in Florida. Different standards, but similar active learning strategies. So for our customers that are from Texas, these are a reminder of the new test item types for STAR. Text entry, which is a number or a word or a couple of words, but something fairly short. A hotspot, which is where they click on the screen. They have to click in the right location to choose the answer. Drag and drop, of course, they drag the answer, either the word or an image, and put it in a different location. Multiple select is where there's more than one correct answer. Multi-part is where there's a question for part A, and then part B relates back to their answer for part A. And then a short constructed response, which is a little longer than a text entry and is usually a few sentences at the most. So writing, but in a short manner. So these is just a reminder again of how many of these new item types are on STAR. It's not a majority of the questions, but the kids still need practice doing these type of assessment items before they'll be successful on STAR. That we have these new question types on all STAR Smart items. So all the practice tests, they have every type of new test item type except for multi-part. No, I'm sorry, except for the constructed response, because we don't have a way to auto grade that. And so we don't have a system to be able to do an automatic grading when they type several sentences in. So an example of a text entry in a STAR Smart would be this question from grade 8, where they have to write down how many valence electrons are in carbon-12 if it has the atomic number of 6 and an atomic mass of 12. So they're typing in a number here. And that would be the answer, just a single number. So they get practice doing text entry before they do the assessment. This is from a different unit, but they have to do text entry. So this is a strategy to have kids do active learning so they're ready for assessment. So these are tools that can be used across the board, both in Florida and in Texas. So here they would put a word or maybe a couple of words that would fill in the blank in these. So that would be considered text entry. And the first part of the instructional module companion, the note-taking guide, all of it is an opportunity to practice giving an answer as a text entry. We also have them in the simulations. So this is a simulation that's found in biology and life science high school in Florida, where they're seeing and counting how many baby crocodiles there are when the eggs are incubated at different temperatures, and the kids enter in a number in the blanks. So this is again, opportunity for text entry practice. We also have it in our science investigation activities. This one is about properties of mixtures. So they have to look at the data that's in the graph and then complete the sentence below. And so this one happens to be one word, and regardless of whether a material dissolves or not in water, the total mass of matter is, and then they put either a word or a short phrase that would answer that question. So this again is text entry. We also have text entry in our EduSmart readers. Sometimes you can consider this a short constructed response. It depends on how long the answer would be. Sometimes in readers, it's a short answer, and sometimes it's a little bit longer. So our readers actually, this question in the readers actually fits 2 different test item types. So the next one I wanted to cover is a hotspot. So this question comes from a grade 5 STAR practice test, and they're showing these different ecosystems. Which system is most like the type of system that formed the fossil fuel coal? And so there are 2 answers, and the students would have to click on both. When you click on an answer, it would highlight it so they would know how many they chose. And so this is a hotspot answer and a multiple select because there are 2 correct answers. We also have a hotspot in our science investigation activities. This time it's they're doing it as they're doing the lab, so it's not an assessment, but what this is showing how the shape of a beak is linked to what kind of food that a finch would eat. And so if you choose the tool of these pliers, it is shaped like the beak of a large ground finch. And what the kids do is select a food item, and then the simulation or this activity moves on to how many food items are they able to pick up with that tool. So they would have to choose all food items by the end of the activity. Our inner activities also have hotspots. So in this one, they're given 3 answers and they have to choose one of them, and they choose it by clicking on the number 1, 2, or 3. So that is also practice doing an activity that has a hot spot. We also have them in simulations. This is back to the Nile crocodile simulation again. So the kids have to select a hypothesis. And so again, they're in 3 boxes and students would have to choose one before moving on. Later, they'll come back to evaluate their hypothesis against the data that they collect, but they have to choose one that they think could be the correct prediction of what would happen at the beginning. So some examples of drag and drop for our Texas Star Smart assessment. So this one, what they're given are 2 columns that have attributes of objects in the universe. And so they have to drag the correct heading or the title for each column. And so those words are at the bottom. And so the kids would use their mouse to drag the correct answer up into the top so that they are getting the correct title for the attributes that are below. So this is an example of drag and drop in the assessment. We have lots of drag and drop in EduSmart resources. So if kids are doing these resources, they should be very familiar with how to do drag and drop. We see this in every Word Explorer vocabulary word that this has 3 parts, and part 3 is what we call a fill-in. So it's a closed activity where kids read the sentence and then have to drag a word to the correct location. So 3 of the 5 words are the correct ones. And so students would drag and drop to put them in the correct order. We also have drag and drop in simulations. This is not showing the little mouse when I took the little hand you get when you use your mouse, but you can see that one of the beakers is kind of moving over to the plate under the burette. And so kids have to physically move the beaker over to the plate. They're also going to do a text entry at the top when they have to fill in the final volume once the water is added from the burette. We have drag and drop in interactivities. So in this one, the 3 yellow sort of posters at the top have different arrows showing direction of the forces. And I had started to pull the push toward each other one down because you have to drag and drop the correct arrows onto the tectonic plates in the center so that you're choosing the ones that would show you the forces that represent a convergent boundary. So you have to drag and drop the correct arrows. And so you do that. And then the next slide would be a different example of some type of plate interaction. We also have drag and drop in science investigation activities. This is one about does the mass of a seed affect its survival, so germination rate? And so students have already collected all this data, and now this is sort of the data analysis part. And we're having them determine the cause and effect relationship. And so we have words up at the top or phrases at the top that they have to drag into the table at the bottom, which is the cause and which is the effect. And they have to use the data table in order to answer that correctly. The next example is multiple select. So in our Star Smart assessment, this has a food web. It's saying that it's changed over a few years, which 2 changes indicate an increase in biodiversity. Select 2 correct answers. So again, there's 5 choices and 2 of them are correct, and they would have to click on both of them. So these questions in our Star Smart assessments are in black and white, and we try to have the font and the layout match what students would see on an actual STAR assessment. And so they need practice doing work that has multiple select. And so we have several instances of this in Word Explorer. I only put one of them up here, which is the facts section. And so this is from biology. And so if they click on the ribosome, first they'll show 4 images for visual examples, and they have to click on each of the correct ones. And then next come these facts. So they're shown these 4 facts, and they have to click on each fact that is true. So this is multiple select. And so when you assign Word Explorer, every single term is going to have 2 options of doing multiple select, the visual example and the facts. And then the fill-in, which comes next, again, is an example of drag and drop. So by doing all the words and Word Explorers for every unit, they'll be very well versed in how to do these assessment item types. We also have multiple select in EduSmart readers. So this is a new reader coming for the new adoption. I'm more familiar with that content, so I knew where to go and find an example really quick. But this is a grade 8 reader on climate change. And one of the questions asked in the quiz at the end of the reader is this one: which 2 statements below are false? And so they have to select more than one answer. This is a little higher cognitive load because you're asking them which ones are false, so which ones aren't true. A little bit higher thinking than asking them which ones are true. Then multiple select and EduSmart simulations. So this is just one example where they have to click for each one, which is the correct prediction of whether it's a conductor or insulator. So that's multiple select. This is a better example in our interactivities. Which biomolecules can be found in this food item? So I dragged the cappuccino over to the shelf there. And what you're supposed to do is click which of these biomolecules would you find in the food. And so you have to collect each of them that you think is true. And then you would select, done. But you would get another chance if you got it incorrect, but it would show you that all of these items are going to have more than one correct answer in terms of the biomolecules that you would find. We also have multiple select and science investigation activities. This one's from grade 4, both in Florida and Texas, on understanding shadows and seasons. And so this is from the beginning of the activity, making sure they understand variables and control at grade 4. And so they've explained before this screen what is a fair test. And so this question is assessing what do they understand from the previous screens. How can we make sure we're conducting a fair test? And so they select 4 answers that are correct. So this, again, is an example of multiple select. The next type of question is multi-part. And like I mentioned briefly at the beginning, they'll have a part A where they're given an image or some data and then a question, this one saying, which picture shows the shadow that Anisha saw in the middle of the day? And so they click on that correct answer. And then part B is related to part A, which statement best supports the answer to part A? So it has 2 parts. So these we don't have in every EduSmart resource, but we have them so kids would have practice with this. This one's not an example of multiple choice, but it's still a multi-part where they have to refer to what they have in part A to answer part B. So this is from a hands-on activity in biology about cell division, where they look at onion root tip cells. And so they have to analyze the data to answer part A and then explain in part B. We also have multi-part in the science investigation activities. These would be on subsequent screens, not one on top of each other because we only have so much screen space. So this is one about shadows during the day. A little bit different than the one we did shadows and seasons, different activity. And so this one, first they're given data and they're asked a question. And then the second part is to ask them for what patterns they see in the data. Multi-part. So also, as I briefly mentioned at the beginning about constructed response and assessment. Currently, we don't have a method for these to be auto-graded, and that's how we want the assessments to be for you, to have them automatically graded so they can populate in your reports when you look at how students are doing. So we don't have them in the assessments, but we have them in a lot of other resources so that kids can get that practice. This one is a constructed response from a reader. They're asked to explain why the gold rings and bracelets in the story are considered part of a mixture, and then support your answer with evidence from the passage. So we're asking them to explain with evidence here. So that's definitely going to take more than one sentence. So this is a constructed response example. We also have these in every instructional module companion. The journal prompt at the end is always a constructed response. So this one, first they have to describe a catastrophic event, but they have to include 3 different points in their answer. So they could possibly do it in one long sentence, but it would probably take them more than one sentence to answer it, but still a short answer. And again, we have these in resources found both in for our teachers in Florida and our teachers in Texas. So we also have a few separate journal activities. Again, this is found in Florida grade 7 and in Texas grade 6, but of course the same concept about heat transfer. And so the students are asked here to look at the parts of a thermos and explain how do each of its parts help to keep coffee hot. And so this would be a constructed response. It shouldn't have to be too long. They could even combine elements that have the same properties and talk about them together rather than listing out each separate property in a sentence. Of course, the CER, the Claim Evidence Reasoning Framework, also has constructed response, where they're given a question, they have to make a claim, they have to provide evidence, either from observations or measurements that they made for data. And then, of course, they have to explain reasoning about how they connected their evidence to the claim, showing that they understand the scientific principle behind the lab. And so we have these right now for every simulation that you can download a CER frame for students to use. And we have them built into some of the hands-on activities as well. So here's an example of a constructed response in a science investigation activity. This is the same concept, again, 6th grade in Texas, 7th grade in Florida. So here, the lab was about thumbtacks that are on different rods made of different materials, and they're held on by wax that melts as heat moves down, whatever rod is the test rod, and they have to compare the time it takes for that wax to melt and the thumbtacks to fall. And so they're asked, why does the thumbtacks fall off when the burner is turned on? So there's a burner at one end of the rod, and they need to understand that the heat is transferred down the rod, and that's what makes the wax melt. And so they have to explain that here in this section for a constructed response. So these are our question types, but I also wanted to cover that, of course, we have different ways to do assessment in terms of these are the resources that we have. We have multiple opportunities for formative assessment. And these activities can be, if they do them in EduSmart, then you can collect all the data from this. That readers have that built-in 5-question quiz. The instructional module companions have the note-taking guide, followed by the graphic organizer, followed by the journal prompt. All of these you can have the data collected in EduSmart as long as you assign it in EduSmart. The student review also has formative assessment questions. Some of them have the new STAR item types. We have those for 3rd through biology. Of course, interactivities, you can collect data from students on how well they did. Simulations, if you do them online, of course, it collects all the data. And you also have the opportunity to download that CER frame or even a traditional lab format that you would have to grade yourself. If you do it online, it collects all that data. And then Word Explorer, all kinds of data that you can collect for that. We're working on adding Word Explorers to grades K-2, as well as instructional module companions for K-2 that should be ready for the next school year. And then our science investigation activities also, of course, have a way to do formative assessment. That these are all completely graded, even the short constructed response. You can see what students did if you want to go back, but this is one where we have them do self-assessment, that they would type in their constructed response. They're shown a correct answer, and they have to sort of use that metacognition to say how well did their answer match the given answer. And so multiple opportunities for formative assessment before you do a summative assessment. And so what I have here are the types of summative assessment we have. The ones in blue are things we only have for Texas because our Florida customers do not need these new test item types. Although doing them in the formative assessment is still good because they have to still use the same thinking skills. They're just not assessed in that manner, that all the Florida SSA exams are multiple choice. But you still have all kinds of ways to do that summative assessment to see if they've understood the concept. And then I briefly wanted to talk about depth of knowledge levels. This applies to both our Florida customers and our Texas customers in terms of the state assessments that students are asked questions that are at different DOK or depth of knowledge. And so explaining depth of knowledge, if you're not familiar, that's a whole nother webinar in itself. So I'm going to be very brief and try to, condense an explanation. Level 1, I'm calling knowledge literacy, because really what you're asking in level 1 is, does the student understand the terms that you're using, or do they understand how to use an equation? So it's basically just literacy. What do they remember? Level 2 is knowledge application. Can they use what they know about science terms to answer questions or interpret data? They're applying that knowledge. Level 3 is takes a little bit more of it's a higher cognitive task where I'm calling it knowledge analysis. So this is not just analyzing data, because that can be level 2. This is not just analyzing data, but using evidence to support an argument. So doing a CER, you can get to level 3. It could be analyzing complex data that's not a typical graph or chart, or multiple graphs and charts would pull that DOK to a level 3. Level 4 can't be tested. I'm calling it knowledge augmentation. A level 4 DOK task is usually done independently by the student, and ideally independently out of class, although they can certainly do some level 4 work in class. But the whole idea is that the learning is driven entirely by the student, and they're connecting science concepts that maybe are not being taught at the same time, or they're connecting science to something that's not even science, like art or literature or music, that they're finding ways to make connections. And for state assessments, both in Texas and Florida, again, we only have the DOK levels 1 through 3. In Texas, we have very few level 3 questions on STAR. The Florida SSA has a few more level 3, but the overwhelming number of questions are at a level 2, that knowledge application. But I did want to show you examples from our assessments that are that level 1, 2, and 3. So you can get a feel for this, because you need to be doing activities. And of course, we have those activities where they're doing that active knowledge at levels 1, 2, and 3. So this is an example of a DOK level 1 from a Florida quiz for grade 4. Florida is built on rocks made of pieces of rocks and fossilized organisms that are bound together. What kind of rocks are those? And they pick the rock that matches the description. So this is a literacy, just understanding sort of the definition of these words to choose the correct one. And here's an example of a DOK 1 from Texas, also grade 4. They're told that iron is a metal. This picture shows a blacksmith working on an iron bar with a hammer. Which characteristics of metals is the blacksmith using to shape the bar? So you have to understand the definition of the answers in order to match it to the question. And so again, this is a depth of knowledge level 1. So examples from a depth of knowledge level 2. This is a question from the Texas product, a reporting category test for Earth and Space. So we have 20 questions in these reporting category tests. And this one, what they have to do is analyze the data. And so they're given all the information, they just have to choose the correct answer, which is which type of soil retained the most water. And so they need to understand how to look at those jars where water was poured through a funnel full of different types of soil, and they choose the correct answer. So this sort of finding the answer from data is a DOK level 2 task. Here's an example from Florida that has to do with genetics. So the unit is called genotype and phenotype combinations. So we don't hit this level of genetics till we get to high school in Texas, but in Florida, they do it in middle school. So the question is understanding about that you have to have, how do you carry a gene? So they have to understand that you have 2 genes for a trait, and probably the easiest way to make sure they understand this is to teach it with a Punnett square, which is not shown here. So that's why it's a DOK level 2. It's not just finding the answer in a Punnett square, but they have to take this written data, understand how to represent it as a genotype, and then figure out the answer. So this is a DOK level 2. Example of a level 3. This is from an SSA practice test from grade 8 in Florida. They're told that liquid detergents are mixtures of chemicals and water. They have egg stains that they're trying to use these detergents to remove. They use the same kind of cloth. They used a cotton swab to sort of rub the detergent into the stain. And they used water as a control, and the table shows the results, which is pretty much that they all had the same results, including the control. And so here they have to do a different level of analysis. The control group had the same results as the test group. What does that mean? And so they have to choose the available answer here. This is a much higher thinking level for students. And then here's an example of one from Texas, 7th grade. So this is one where we don't have a typical data chart that's only showing one sort of instance of data collection. This is showing the original population and 3 years later, all on the same graph, as well as information about not just one measurement on the bottom like time, but the fact that you have a range of colors across the bottom on the x-axis. So this is complex data. And so they're asked to which of the answers best explains the changes in the guppies. So you have to read the top, understand a complex graph, and then answer the question. It's not an overly difficult level 2, but it has a higher cognitive load. Depth of knowledge levels have nothing to do with difficulty of the question. It has to do with how much thinking the student has to do to get to the answer. So you can have very difficult level 3s, or you can have some that are, not overly difficult, but again, you have to do a lot more thinking to get to the answer than a level 2. And so reminder that when you're trying to see how students are doing before you get to that summative assessment, that you can monitor student performance with the progress monitoring report that you can get to within EduSmart. This is a class that doesn't have very many students, but it's sort of our fake student account, so we can show data. We don't want to use real student data. And so you can see at a glance, this is a 5th grade class, but it has some 3rd and 4th grade standards because they're tested on STAR. And so this would be a way for you to check how well they did. This example, they're showing how did they do on STAR practice test. And so it's very easy to see that they have a good grasp of 4.8C over here, where everyone got 100 when this standard was tested. But you have a few that you might want to go back and review again before they take the final STAR at the end of the year. Like 3.3B, not every student did as well. Of course, you would have more students to make that analysis than we do with this example. And so just to remember how to get to it, the navigation is the same as it has been, but the way the reports show up is a little bit different. So from your account, you would click on My Groups. And then next you would click, you have 3 different orange icons. One is to look at the students, one is to look at the data, and one is to delete your group. So don't click on the trash can icon. You want to click on the middle one that's data. And then you have all the different reports you can get from that class. Assignment reports, quiz reports, STAR Smart reports, and here that progress monitoring report will allow you not just to see their assessment on the practice test, but any quizzes, anything that's the summative assessment you can get data on. So what you would do first is click on which grade or which class, the type of test, the quiz. This one is the STAR practice test. So, oh, let me go back because I forgot to put this in here. So you can select between a quiz or a STAR Smart test. Then if you choose STAR Smart, is it the unit test, the reporting category test, or the practice test? And then once you select, whoops, you hit the submit button. And then you'll see the data that you see on the bottom. You can also export it as an Excel file so that you can look at it offline if you need to. You can also do an item analysis with the STAR practice exams or the SSA practice exams, where it will tell you the DOK level of the question, and then which answers the student selected. And so we only have 4 students in this practice class. And you can see here that only 1 student selected the correct answer. That's what the asterisk means. So it gives you an idea of not only how many students did not select the correct answer, but which ones chose the incorrect answer. You know, where is the learning having an issue? If they all selected the same wrong answer, it tells you, it gives you a clue for what concept they're having trouble with, and you can go back and do a reteach. So I was reading when I was preparing for this webinar about what skills do employers look for when they're hiring someone new. This is a study from 2020 from the World Economic Forum, but I thought it was very applicable to what we were talking about today when we're preparing kids for assessment. By doing this in multiple ways, you're also helping prepare them for employment. The number one thing that employers look for is can the applicant do complex problem solving? Next is critical thinking. 3rd is creativity. 4th is teamwork and collaboration. Then work ethic and persistence, emotional intelligence, judgment and decision making, active listening, negotiation, and cognitive flexibility. And so if you think about it, you want your students to be able to do all of these skills as well. And so doing multiple types of activities can help with the problem solving, it can help with all of these, especially cognitive flexibility. And even negotiation comes up in some activities like claim evidence reasoning, where they have to do the argumentation part, explaining and doing sort of that peer, getting peer feedback. So I thought this, like I said, was very applicable to what we're talking about today. So I wanted to open it up for questions. I don't see any in the chat, so I'm not going to wait a really long time for questions. But I want to make it clear that if you have a question about what we talked about today, or a question about any of the content in EduSmart, you are more than welcome to contact me anytime. My email is just lisa@edusmart.com, so that's pretty easy to remember, especially because I have a last name that's difficult to spell. So I'm Lisa DeLaurier, lisa@edusmart.com. So I'm not getting any questions, so I'm going to move on to do a recap of what we covered today, what I said we would do, and let's make sure I did all of these things. We had a brief overview of the new test item types. We discussed how to prepare students for assessments. We discovered where to find new item types in EduSmart resources and assessments. We went over briefly how to monitor student performance in EduSmart, and we had the opportunity for a live question and answer session, but I didn't get any questions. So lastly, I want to thank you for attending. We have an entire team here at EduSmart that is more than willing to help or answer any of your questions. I'm going to stay online here just to make sure that there aren't questions that are coming in. If you want to wait till people leave to answer your question, I'm going to stay here until everyone exits our Zoom. Again, thanks for attending. We're so happy that you were able to be with us today. And I hope you have a great school year.